Are you ready to install your destiny? Get ready for Swerve, the mind-bending, world-ending non-game, now on the Game Bro and Game Bro Advance. Load it up, connect with your party with link cable, and experience the most dangerous co-op session you'll never actually play. Swerve is playable. You can play it. Swerve, the game that's already here. Available now for Game Bro and Game Bro Advance. This product does not reveal about template, pressure-induced diarrhea, alcoholism, public time storage, and depersonalization. Induced depression. Buy now.
I have a special friend of mine. I'm going to say my Dirk, but I know you may want to introduce yourself.
I'm Cory, either Uncannycory or Damocles Defied, wherever you might want to find me.
Tell me a little bit about Hetalia, but how that led into Homestuck.
So I guess if you want to go way back, I got into Hetalia in 2009, and that would have been, or 2008, 2009, I would have been in middle school, high school, but it wasn't until like 2011 that I actually found out what Homestuck was. At that point, I was still not really active on Tumblr. I was mostly on DeviantArt at that point, and I had been primarily on DeviantArt since like 2005, 2006. And I remember, like, back, I don't know what DeviantArt's like nowadays. Primarily at that point, I remember I was following a lot of people, and I always like read through all their little journals. They had those little journals that they did. And someone put up like the first panel, and they said, I can't figure out if this is a game I need to figure out how to play, or if this is a story. And they were just talking about that, and I was like, oh, I'm interested. So I clicked through and started reading it, and from that point on, I wasn't gonna as obsessed as I would become, I guess, because wouldn't be until like 2012, 2013 that I really would say that I became part of the fandom. Primarily in the Hetalia fandom until that point. But by the time I was getting out of high school, I was kind of full-time into Homestuck.
Nice, nice. So tell me a little bit about, so you said you came from DeviantArt. So what was the environment like on DeviantArt? What was all that? Because I was on DeviantArt back in the day, and I remember they used to have chat rooms that you would go and find people like to roleplay in. I remember Hetalia was pretty big, because I was in one of these chat rooms, and this is before they switched the logo even. I think this was like hella early. And in these chat rooms, we would send little stickers back and forth, like people would make little emotes or emojis or stuff like that. I don't fully remember, and I remember that DeviantArt had their own list of really silly little like animated emojis. And yeah, so were you on like those group chats or?
So it's really hard to say because, like I said, I was on DeviantArt since like 2005 to 2006, like late elementary school on through middle school onward. So how I used DeviantArt over the years kind of changed. I never really was a forum kid, and not to say that I wasn't like part of forums outside of DeviantArt, because I like, it was the early internet. If you wanted to go to find something specific, you would go to a forum. Primarily what I used DeviantArt for was like posting my art, obviously. I kind of used it to join group projects. I know for a while I was people would make pages, and I don't remember if DeviantArt eventually found a way to standardize that into like doing groups that people could join. That's like,
I think that was way later.
We're talking about 2 decades ago about how I can remembering this. So you gotta forgive me.
No, okay.
How clear my memories are. But I helped run some groups, one being like a writing thing, and then I joined another one that was supposed to be like everyone made a character to interact with the story. I had like 2 different accounts at that time, because this was before you could change the name of your account. So if you wanted to change your account name, you had to make a whole new account. And I had gone through, this was also before I started archiving all my stuff, so there's probably a lot that's missing from that time. But like towards the end of it, what I can remember the most clearly was helping join and run these sorts of groups that they had. And a lot of if you go back to my old DeviantArt now, that's probably mostly what you'd see.
That's so cool. Do you have any like stories that you remember from the time of like role plays maybe that you guys did? I don't know, like if you said you were in part of these group chats, was anything ever I don't know, fun?
So on DeviantArt, I didn't really do a lot of role playing so much. That was mostly, to sound very old, I did that mostly through Neopets and other
Really?
those, in Gaia and Freeform. People could sign up for those free forums where you could make all the different rooms and boards. I did a lot of those, and then by the time I was moving out of Neopets in an elementary school to Gaia and stuff, I had moved. All of my roleplay partners had mostly been moved to Yahoo Instant Message, AOL Instant Message, when those started going downhill. Skype, I think for a minute, Google had Google Instant Message. Obviously, once Skype started dying, that's when I started moving to Discord.
I see. Okay. And then, what were some specific creators that inspired you?
In general, or in Homestuck specifically? Because those are kind of different questions.
Actually, if you have something to say about say when you were during this DeviantArt time, these artists and things, some other people were doing it and you were watching them do it. So was there somebody specific in then that was wow, this is a really cool way to engage with this?
By the time I got into Homestuck, I was leaving DeviantArt, so I wasn't actually on DeviantArt while Homestuck was a thing that I was doing. If we want to talk, I don't actually have a huge memory of a lot of the creators that I followed from DeviantArt, and the ones that I do are I don't even remember I remember who they are, and I could probably go back and I'd still be following them. But a lot of them are photographers or other people who did photo manipulation. So it's not artists that I would be able to name when I was on Tumblr. But if we're going to talk about artists that I followed on Tumblr very early on, if you're talking about Hitalia, I was in a lot of role playing groups at that time. In these role playing blogs were kind of pre-Ask blog culture. Because Ask blogs did sort of exist, but a lot of these original Ask blogs that came on Tumblr came from role-playing circles and were originally role-play things, but role-play groups that, for instance, when I was doing this, I was into Hitalia primarily, and you only would have you would have your America or your Canada or your Russia, because if you start, and you might have little one-on-one role plays with some other people in the group setting of these role play blogs, you don't want to mix up a lot of any stories that you're doing by having more than one of the same character. So a lot of the people, when they couldn't interact with these people that were essentially in the same group circles as them, because they might already have someone they're primarily role-playing that character with, they would essentially send in magic on Ask. And you can see a lot of this in how people use or interact with Ask blogs now, because essentially the Ask blog culture kind of evolved from these role-play groups, because you still wanted to interact with people who were in the same RP circles, even if they weren't up for actually doing a full-on roleplay with you.
That clicks so much together for me, because I've done that. I've been in the group, we each have one of our own, and I wonder how much of it was those people who were doing this on other forums, whatever the heck the early stages were, and then evolved into the fandoms that I was in. I mean, we did Sonic characters, that's a different thing. But when I was doing creepypasta, we fell into that immediately. Everybody had their own character. I was Lost Silver. It was silly. And then each of the characters, we would interact that way. But when we go over to Homestuck, from where I came from, same thing. Everybody, we had our group chats, and then each family, I guess, would have one of each character. And I remember there were different types of families. Adora Bloodthirsty comes to mind, and it was Adora Bloodthirsty Carcat, Adora Bloodthirsty Terezi, and everybody was making different accounts on, at this point, this was on Instagram. I remember Twitter did it a little bit too with the Vocaloids. Yeah, you interact with each other. I'm the Eridan, and then they had these Instagram accounts that would do votes or whatever, the best Eridan, the best Kanaya, and so you'd pit these families up against each other, and it was really fun because, you said, there was your groups that you'd hang out with, but then you would also do individual role plays. People at the time would also, repost other people's art, usually without credit or consent, but that's how we did things. They'd throw up a role play starter, and then you guys would go in the comment section. At first they didn't have DMs and Instagram for a while, so live in front of everybody you guys would be role playing, and it was just, I don't know, it was a lot of fun. And I just, it's fascinating that it extended and it developed that way, or it's just the natural way that things go. But very cool.
I mean, like, it's not like we don't still have roleplay circles now, and it's not like we didn't also have, like, Ask blogs sort of back then. It was just, like, the sort of natural evolution of things. Because back in a very early Tumblr, we also didn't have instant messaging, and we had very limited asks that you could send per day. So a lot of it also was in just reblogging these long posts that had the little bars popping out every time, and then once it got too far and it kept shoving all of the text to the right off the screen, you'd have to start a whole new post so you could keep going, because you couldn't just keep sending asks, because you only had so many asks a day. And I still follow, like, there's still actually a pretty good in Homestuck roleplay accounts, but primarily the ones that I see that do well and aren't just ask blogs, essentially role-playing amongst each other, is fan trolls, actually. The biggest role-play groups I see on Tumblr are currently in the fan troll blogs, and it's one of those things that I've been kind of wishing I could get back into, because it's just so nostalgic for me. I don't even think any of my old role-play accounts still exist, because I was looking through all my pictures for you, see if I could find some of my really, really old Homestuck art for you.
Mm-hmm.
I found one of my old Ask blogs, and he doesn't exist. The actual blog doesn't exist anymore.
Oh,
it's old art.
That sounds so charming.
I don't know, it feels really embarrassing and cringy when I think about it. But it was a time when a lot of people were just doing a lot of stuff like that. I don't know, it was, in some ways I feel like because it was a lot more community-oriented back then,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, you hear people complain about it all the time, like reblog each other's art, comment on fan fictions, interact with each other, because there's not going to be a fandom without it.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it was easier back then because there was just such a huge saturation of it.
That plays a part for sure.
So it was, like, I'm going back through all my blog, and it was just, like, I know at the time I was just reblogging stuff like crazy once I actually started, like, using Tumblr properly. Yeah, it just kind of, like, if it was all came across my desk, the likelihood that I'd reblog it was pretty high. That it's just, like, a huge archive of just this old art, and it from so many different people, and it really just, like, makes it it's really easy to feel how it was just everywhere at the time if you were in circles that reblogged it.
I would love to, like, walk through that, like, going through and back at time. I know that we talked about there being the bot that you can, like, change the date, and then you can kind of see, like, what the dashboard would have been like at that time, and, like, going through your blog. I don't know if you had a chance to do that.
I mean, I'm kind of going through my archive now, because, like, the reason I didn't do the script that would take you back to your dash at the time is that, and why I'm choosing to go through my archive instead, is going back to your dash on that year will only pretty much bring you to who you followed now at that time. But if you're going back through my archive, it really highlights how many people have just deactivated or deleted all their Homestuck art from that time. Even if they still have a modern blog, they've cleaned it up to, like, promote their own original work, or but, like, a lot of people just aren't on Tumblr anymore like the way they used to be, and Tumblr a couple times has purged an active blog. I don't know exactly when that's happened, but that's how I don't have any of my roleplay accounts or my old Ask blogs anymore. And going back through my archive, because posts are kind of permanent whether you have a blog or not. I mean, unless you make it unrebloggable, but that's really a recent thing that Tumblr's done. I can look at all this art from people who no longer technically exist on Tumblr because I reblogged it like 12 years ago or more now.
Do you understand what a goldmine that is?
I mean, it's all Equius, so, like, it really depends on if you like Equius.
Well, who are your favorite characters?
My favorite Homestuck characters are Equius, Dirk and/or Brostrider, Solix, Captor, and John Egbert.
It's crazy how many of those I'm attracted to. If we want to get into, like, the role plays turning into, like, oh shit, I can this character, we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, meeting people who embody these characters, and you get to experience them on a different level, I think is what makes roleplay for me, and it's something that, like, I really, really miss when people would get really invested in canon characters, as much as I love OCs, and I'm sure there is, okay, I used to have OCs back on in my Sonic days, right? You've seen my Sonic characters. I had Saxon the Hedgehog, he was a lady killer, I had Calixto, oh my god, my OCs were made for the women. But, like, despite all of this, And at the time or whatever, I remember we used to talk about how our OCs were extensions of ourselves, and how like the different OCs that we made embodied different characteristics. So like my Saxon, my main guy, I was like, I'm gonna put all of my evil bad into him. And then like everybody loved him. And then I was like, oh shit, maybe I like my bad evil parts. It's not so bad, which is an experience that maybe not everybody has, obviously. Maybe I'm, mentally ill. I don't know. It's really charming when you meet somebody who could just take a character and run with it. And it doesn't always, people make canon such a big deal, but it doesn't always have to be.
I mean, I feel like there's two parts of it. And this goes into like how I feel as a writer. There's like several parts to writing. There's writing as in with the intention, with the author's intentions, and understanding what the author's trying to say via their writing and the characters that they're putting there.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the writing without considering the intentions or what the author's trying to say, which is what Death of the Author actually alludes to. Like, you're taking the text at its surface level without any additional context of what we know about the author. And then there's what you're taking from it as a reader. Because, and it's one of the things why I think people really encourage leaving comments and, interacting with people in fandom, and it's because when people are writing and creating things, especially writers, as someone who's considers themselves primarily a writer, it's sort of like a conversation that you're trying to have with somebody, whatever you're trying to say, whether it's just the conversations like I'm horny, or the conversations like I'm taking a view into what I think about this character. When you're reading and understanding text, you're having a conversation with that text in front of you and you're making it your understanding of it. So every text will have 3 iterations just at its base. It's what the author is trying to put down, what the text by itself without any further interpretation is, and the interpretation from the text to the reader.
So the reason I asked this, because I did want to get you a little bit more into how much you put of yourself into it,
Oh, I mean, the next part of that is I don't consider myself having someone who would be having ever really participated in kinney culture.
Really?
I have, yeah, because I was there when that kind of there's always been a certain amount of that. Therians are one of the oldest version of going, I'm that actually. And Therians are mostly with animals. But I was actually around on Tumblr during the time when, you still see it now sometimes where they're don't tag as kin and don't tag as me. I remember I only remember this so clearly because it used to be that I had a tag I used to tag my blog much more thoroughly than I do now. But back at that point, I had a tag that was essentially my cheer up tag, and the tags for it was GPOI, or gratuitous pictures of yourself, and me. But suddenly, when the kinney stuff started, and I don't have anything against people who do kin stuff. Some people I know are very serious about it. Some people I know are very much oh yeah, I just associate myself with this character. And I don't have a judgment about it either way. As long as someone's happy with what they're doing, you go, you have fun. You're not hurting anyone, you're having a blast, A+. But back at the time, it was really interesting because people, you started hearing about things like kin wars, when people would be no doubles, no blah 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 blah. And because of all the drama that started happening with those groups, people were I do not want to see any tags that say kinney on it, and I don't want to see any tags that say for me on it, and I will block you if you do. So I had to essentially abandon that tag because while that tag wasn't was never actually supposed to be saying, oh, that's me, all of the tags were GPOI and me and blah blah blah, and those were my tags to categorize stuff for me to go back to look at when I was sad. So it's why I remember this so clearly, because that was a pretty big culture shift change on Tumblr.
Could you give me a range of the dates that happened? Because it sounds like 2017, 2018 from my perception.
Apparently all of my links on my page are still broken. Did fix that. But I can see when the last time I used that tag. I don't know. I thought I still had the tag put in, but I think at some point I cleared out the tag link page I had, which is a disappointment. And because I don't really remember I know that it had to have been after 2012.
So this is something that's interesting, and this is just comes to mind. This was like somebody started doing this, and then it became like acceptable that everybody was like, you can't even tag this word. Don't even tag me.
Well, I mean, it wasn't so much like an acceptable thing, because even back then it was kind of contentious. It was more like, I mean, and it was not something that anyone could have enforced outside of blocking. And like you see the same thing with DNIs now, essentially. But people would make these little like banners along the bottom of their posts that say don't blog for this blah blah if this and this. It looks like the last time I actually used these tags, because I finally found it was 2014.
Oh wow!
So, and like if you look back at these tags, it was a lot of like stuff about depression, or like hairstyles I like, or object head stuff, like things that like aren't physically me, because I had another tag for my own face, which was vain teenage blogging, which was fun to change after I was no longer a teenager. I mean, there's always been a sort, like back then it was a little harder because blocking wasn't as complete as it is now. Like, it used to be that you could block someone and they could still show up on your dash, or in some cases you could block them and they could still sometimes send you ass. Blocking on Tumblr didn't used to actually be super useful. And I might be wrong on exactly what they could do. I just know that back then a lot of people it was a lot harder to get people completely off your dash that you blocked. But it was also because a lot of Kinney blogs would just start going on to art and either picking fights with people or role-playing on people's art. And then back then the way Tumblr worked was you didn't have an activities page, so when someone reblogged it, it would show up on your dashboard between posts. So if you had a lot of people reblogging your stuff, it would start stretching your dash out, and you wouldn't be able to actually use your dashboard.
Oh, that's bad.
So, like, people would be like, please stop role-playing on my art. Please stop getting in fights on my art.
Oh.
And that started boiling down to, please don't tag my art as this or this. At that point, like I said, I didn't really have a horse in this race. I was not I wasn't writing very often at that point. I had some art, but it wasn't very good. I don't even know. But, like, I essentially stopped using that because some people would essentially just be like, if you tag my art as this sort of stuff, I will just block it. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be blocked, but thanks.
So you kind of just took, like, I don't want to invoke anybody being a fucking asshole to me right now. I cannot handle it.
Well, I mean, it's like I don't follow people who, if I've noticed that they specifically have something that I would be in my DNI, I just think DNIs are silly because I'm still going to reblog their art even if I'm not following them, because I'm not out checking everybody's page.
Yes, and I feel like that's been the biggest issue is that, okay, so this is a boundaries thing, right? Boundaries are like your things. Like if somebody is doing something you don't like, you remove them. Like you step away. Like you block them. But at some point, people thought that boundaries meant this is what is acceptable in my house. And like, you have to act this way. And you know, like people absolutely should have the liberty to be able to express that they're not comfortable with something. And, you know, like if that's their prerogative, that's totally fine. But that's not how you work with people, you know, like I don't know. One of the things I struggle watching.
So an effective boundary is, like you said, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Mm-hmm. And it's mostly only because you can't control what anyone else is going to do. So for a lot of DNIs say, don't do this. This is my boundary. But you can't. A boundary isn't don't do this, because you can't make people not do this. What you can say is, if you do this, I will block you. Or if you do this, I'm not going to talk to you, and then you have to follow through. It's one of the biggest counterpoints of why DNIs don't work, because the people who actually are going to respect your boundaries are the ones who are going to, of course, not interact, which is a good thing. But bad faith actors aren't going to listen to your DNI, and they're going to and they can even say, oh, I agree with you and I'm not like this. But they're not going to be they could lie to you, and they're not going to be the ones to listen to it anyway. So it's one of those things where it's not going to protect you from the people that you want to be protected from, because the people who don't want to bother you are going to be nice and say, okay, well, I'm not wanted here, but they were the people who weren't going to be bothering you about it anyway, in all likelihood.
Yeah, isn't it funny how that works?
Yeah, I mean, it's just how it's like. I mean, if you want to get into a bigger picture of it, it's just like a lot of parents don't understand this either. So a lot of that is just people mirroring the sort of like rules and punishment of how they grew up, without really like contextualizing why they might have hated it as a kid and why it doesn't really work now. It might never have properly worked.
Oh, that gets into a whole other can of worms that I think is impacting fandom now. But yeah, it's neither here nor there.
People have always been doing this. Like, people acting like DNIs are like the newest thing. It's just like, yeah, people have been doing stuff like this and being weird in fandom for as long as fandoms really existed. And we might not have always had the best ways to block people, especially on Tumblr. That's all you can really do. You can only enforce what you do and what you see, and you can't really force anyone to do anything else.
Yeah, and that's just a sanity thing. Like, you will go insane freaking out over what other people do. Like, it is incomprehensible how much you can't impact the swaths of people. And another thing that I think people misunderstand is that if we're going to be talking about them being like an objectively bad person, and let's imagine we're thinking of the same person, even though I know that we all have different ideas of what that means. But so yes, we found the person that this is a horrible person and they're doing awful things. There's like 40% of them are the like humans. Like it's a ridiculous amount of people that fall into this category. I don't know. It's if you want to change that, you can only change that within yourself, and you can only hope that you inspire people to not be that way, and the benefits of not being certain criteria or whatever. And this is just like the objective whatever thing there, but again, then we get into different perceptions of like somebody who may be religious and somebody who may not be, you know, like it's difficult. I'm sure if you have other thoughts to expand on that.
I mean, I guess what it comes down to is like there are certain things as a society that we've agreed are just bad, and like most of those things are like murder is bad, sexual abuse is bad, any sort of abuse is bad. Thing is, we can only really control what is actually, and like we can't even really control what is legal. Our legal system can't even really control what people do that's legal or illegal. So when it comes to online spaces, for me it's like you can only curate your own experience. It's always been that way. Like, I remember being 8 years old and going to these flash game websites and playing like flash games where Osama bin Laden's like exploding people or ragdolling our President Obama down a slide. These were flash sites that also had like normal games on it and like, you know, regular like, flash games.
Oh my god, like Box 10 comes to mind.
Yeah, like, I mean, the ones that are coming to my head right now didn't, like, the ones that had the really bad ones on it, but, like, Newgrounds, like, is the one the very popular one. You got some edgy stuff on there. Not all of it was good, and most of it wasn't good. But, like, all I could do when I didn't like seeing that, because I was kind of a sensitive kid, close out of it. And, like, some of it there was some worse things I definitely saw that I definitely had to talk to people about. But, like, ultimately, even as a kid, I understood that if I'm looking somewhere where I'm not supposed to be looking, it's my duty to, like, press the X button, because my parents should have probably been looking at me and watching me to make sure I don't get into those things in the first place. And the line for me there is someone actually getting hurt, and is someone doing something illegal? And that's not necessarily a fun line to toe, because it's like, it doesn't make you feel good, because it's like, there's a lot of really, really terrible things that are unfortunately legal. But the thing is, there's like lines and stuff there because expression, and you start getting into like parody, you start getting into, because a lot of those flash games, as violent as they were in my memory, were literally just parody, and as an adult they were very, very tame compared to like real stuff, horrible things that you could find on the internet. Like, it was literally just flash puppet presidents getting exploded limb by limb with blood everywhere. But I was just like 8 years old, so that's shocking to me. But as an adult, I'm remembering this, and I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's a flash game. because I was a sensitive kid. I was a big baby. I don't know. It's hard to feel like good. Oh, like it feels funny looking at people who are expecting others to curate their experience online. Because I grew up in the era of like you have to curate. Even technically safe areas will have like insane things on them, and you'll never know.
Yeah. Currently nowadays, and I think what the kids nowadays are going to be traumatized with, we'll use the word traumatized, we get into that later, they're Elsagate, you know? What the fuck? It was like Spider-Man and Elsa, and they're like spanking each other, like these like just very strange things that were targeted towards kids, you know, like these kids, you know, on the internet, they're not being watched. I think that is a huge issue, and there's a lot of reasons that are contributing to that, but this is what's happening, and the parents are not like there, and they're getting exposed to these things, and they don't have the ability at this point to express or talk about what they're seeing. Parents are very, I think in a lot of these aspects, absent, very neglectful for lots of other reasons, but I think this is where a lot of these people who, when they see things that they don't like, they don't know how to get away from those feelings, you know?
Well, I mean, I think it's also harder because, like, I wouldn't trust, I guess the best way to put it is I would trust a kid on the internet where I was when I was on the internet as a kid. And not necessarily because the internet was nicer or safer, but because there were first a lot more places to be a kid safely online.
True.
Even if those places weren't necessarily always safe. Like there was always an amount of risk to be online, even in kid safe spaces. Roblox has had a huge problem with that.
Oof,
and
that's
I'm
a
not
whole
even
other aspect.
that's a thing I know of, and I'm not even part of the Roblox community. Minecraft has that problem. I am part of them. I would consider myself part of the Minecraft community. But like back then, there wasn't an expectation to be safe, that things were going to be safe. I had classes in middle school, I guess is the best way to put it, where they taught us how to be internet safe and taught us how to type and taught us how to use the computer. Like, we don't have computer classes for kids anymore. But even if we did, the way the internet is made now is, like, completely different. Like, it's not to say that there weren't ads and there weren't targeted stuff on the internet as a kid, but it's kind of accelerated in a way that makes the internet completely different now. Because also everything is social media, and that used to not be a thing. Like, Neopets and Gaia Online and stuff like that, like, yeah, it was a game and there was a social aspect of it, but it wasn't a social media. I mean, Gaia Online was essentially a social, like, chat room, which I would say is completely different than a social media. Chat rooms don't have the same longevity, and while you could get clicks and have a hierarchy in chat rooms, like, you weren't curating yourself to the same extent to be seen by thousands and millions of people. You could still be seen, like, I remember decorating my Neopets pages, my Gaia pages, but, like, you're not appealing to, like, your whole family and your whole, like, town. You're appealing to, like, the two other people in your fandom on the same chat room. And social medias are a completely different thing, and, like, people use social media in places where it used to be, like, MMOs. Because MMOs used to be the main chat room where people would go to hang out online, and now people are just direct messaging each other. And, like, if you want to even go farther than that, like, YouTube comments used to be much more chat room-like than they are comment sections. Like, a comment section now is something that you would think is completely distinct from a chat room. But it used to be that YouTube comments had a much more chat room-like feel. I was probably like 11 or 12, and I joined essentially this poetry group on YouTube. And most of it was adults, but not all of them. Some of it were like young tweens, and we would go and share our poetry. And like everyone would put up their little videos. The kids were like, well, we're kids, so we're not allowed to post our face online. But back then, YouTube had a better direct messaging thing, and now it's like direct messaging is kind of neutered for. Probably because they have big stars, presumably, that make, and you know, that people don't want to get spammed. But YouTube used to have a pretty robust direct messaging system. And I remember, like, sending off my poetry, and this, like, 6-year-old guy being, like reading off the poetry. And it would be a whole, like, chat room sort of feel where it would, like, automatically update, and people would be commenting in each other's threads and under the thing. Once a week, they would post something on YouTube, and everyone would get in the comments, and it would go run like a chat room where we'd be commenting on each other's poetry. Social media feels very distinct from most chat room style things. And you kind of sort of see it in Homestuck, if we want to go back, wrap it back around to this, because Homestuck, like, it was very much like, the memos are a joke. Well, memos are very much a chat room joke, which is very funny to me every time it happens. I'm not quite old enough to have participated very much in IRC chats, but was in some of their predecessors in, like, Paint Chat and, like, those online chat boards where you could draw, like, all on the same canvas with a bunch of people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, internet relay chat rooms were already kind of dying by that point. IM systems were coming in, and forums were pretty much taking place of those. Not that they don't still exist in some places, but when I was a kid, some of the last ones that you would see regularly were the Paint Chat boards, and those are, I think, a type of, they kind of function similarly, but with the chat room going live at the bottom, where everyone could just pick a name and type in the board, but they would also have the big canvas where you could draw on. So, like, the internet, I guess, is what I was trying to say, is fundamentally changed since I was a kid, and people who grew up and could have kids, like, at my age now, they're not necessarily, when they think of how their kids are going to interact online, they think of their childhood online, and they're not thinking about the actual reality of what kids are facing. Like, you were talking about the ElsaGate stuff, and that couldn't have physically happened on YouTube back when I was a kid, because they didn't have such a thing as YouTube Kids. YouTube was literally just like one homepage. You had the videos at the top, a little bar, and that couldn't have happened. And you could see some pretty insane things back on YouTube back at that point. But at that point, you also know that what you're supposed to be looking at, not because your parents allowed ground into you to be good on the computer and probably had parental. And it's hard because on one hand, it should be the parents' responsibility to know what their kids are doing online. But on the other hand, it's really hard because, especially as those kids get older, there is a certain amount of, if you're helicopter parenting them too hard, you're not going to have kids who are independent and know how to make safe choices online, because they're expecting you to make them for them.
Or the other side of that, just to say, is they learn how to sneak it, and then they feel too guilty to ever talk about anything that ever happens. Yes. But go on.
So it's like it's a hard thing to do. You have to be able to, especially as kids get older, you want to foster that sort of independence. But a lot of parents that are my age or older don't necessarily have the knowledge of what being online to a kid looks like now, because it's completely different. I don't know I know that what kids are doing online nowadays. I know YouTube, I know it's TikTok, I know it's Roblox and Minecraft and Reddit and Tumblr and Instagram, but, like, I'm on Tumblr. So
yeah, there's no adult spaces at this point. It becomes a homogenous thing, but then it's also like,
there's no kid spaces.
Yes,
it's a double-edged sword. There's no place for kids to necessarily be safe and be a kid, and there's no places for an adult to be an adult, and there's always going to be the situation where kids are going to sneak into adult spaces. And back when I was a kid, that was a shut your mouth, pretend you're 18, and if you're scarred about it, talk to your parents. And I was lucky that I didn't get into anything that hurt me so badly that I permanently damaged by it, I guess, or permanently traumatized by it. And there were some pretty nasty things, but, like, it's easier and harder now because it's like the whole world is different. So I can't blame these kids for going online and being weird and not knowing how to set boundaries. But on one hand, it should be their parents' responsibility, but on the other hand, I also know that it wouldn't help in all likelihood. Because if kids are looking for independence online, they're going to be trying to avoid being seen by their parents. It reminds me of that, like, I don't remember if this was on Reddit or Tumblr that I saw it, but it was this girl who was like, I found out my mom's a pro shipper, and I was just like, oof, what? she started going on and on about how her mom was shipping this toxic ship in this show that they both watched together. And how she doesn't think it was something completely benign. At a certain point, kids, even if parents are watching kids online, they're going to be trying to make their own identities and choose their own morals and ideas of how the world's going to work. And parental supervision isn't going to save them, because they're at the age where they're trying to figure it out how to be an adult by themselves. And in that case, it's a mom who clearly has, like, some more open ideas over what whatever show they were watching. And the kid thought that was terrible, and the kid started going off like, well, I might not be safe around my mom because my mom is a pro shipper or whatever, and the mom has no idea that this is what their kid's freaking out about. Because for mom, it was just like oh, I'm shipping 2 people in Game of Thrones or whatever. Isn't this so funny? I don't even know if that's the fandom, but it was like something so benign like that. Mm-hmm. So there's not really like a good answer other than being an aware parent. Because you can't babysit a teenager's every move online, and you can't as much. You can hope that you're distilling rational ability to break down things, but we're also in an age where people joke online about reading comprehension, but if we want to talk bigger level of it, our literacy is actively going down.
Yes.
We've been in going on from an academic angle of it. We have been I was the first generation who didn't get taught phonics. The generation before me got proper phonics, and I got some of it. We learned how to sound out words and stuff like that, but we never properly learned phonics. Nowadays, I know that the very accepted teaching is whole word learning. So there's a lot of schools, and I'm not gonna say all of them, that are learning who are trying to teach children how to read, not by sounding out words, but by picking up the words, figuring out what the word is from looking at the surrounding words they already know. The thing about reading like that is it's okay to do that if you already kind of have a big vocabulary or you have the base of phonics, because you're not going to know every word, and if you know how to prefix and suffix for words, you can kind of figure out what words are, and if you don't really know what it is, you can sort of get it from the context around the word. You're also having kids who are now not actually reading, they're guessing at the words on the page, and they do not know how to sound out the word.
Wow. Oh, I was taught phonics then, if that's what that is. There was
a generation after me that went back to phonics.
That was me.
I know that I follow a lot of early childhood education and teaching boards on Reddit, because that's what I was going to do. So, and I've been hearing that's been a strategy and a thing that people are doing now again. But it's not necessarily good, because that means kids are kind of guessing at what's on the page and not necessarily reading what's on the page. It contributes, because kids aren't actually looking or understanding what they're saying, because they're gimming it all. They're not actually reading.
But they did that to them, and then that gets into how they're fucking over the school system and taking away their budget, because they don't want an educated populace. But we don't have to get into that. But it feels so deliberate, and to watch the effects live, I see it on I'm just gonna get into I see it on. Right now I got into Blue Sky. That's a pretty new thing for me. I was never really on Twitter, didn't feel comfortable with Twitter. But these kids who they were on Twitter, which the fuck, they were on Twitter. Holy shit. They're fucked for that reason, right? But they're here and they can't even write. I love them. They're so cute and sweet, and do your thing, but I can't read what you're saying. It's that one fucking meme from Finding Nemo where he's like, "You're so cute, but I don't know what you're fucking trying to say to me." You're they're being failed. They are not learning how to even the fundamentals. They can't read. They can't write. They don't, like you said, the joke of they don't have reading comprehension. They literally do not have reading comprehension.
It's a skill. I was gonna, if I was gonna go into social work, I was gonna either go into history or English as a teacher. Mm-hmm. And it is a skill to be able to sit down and understand the multiple layers of anything that's happening at any given when you're reading it. When I was in high school, it was a joke of what does the blue curtains mean, and what symbolism, and why does that matter? The blue curtains can also just be blue. But the thing is, learning how to say, in the context of the color language of this story, what does a blue curtain mean in an otherwise bright house, when the character is also talking about how her grandma is really sick? Why is the character fixating on this? Because it could just be a blue curtain, but also if the the main character is fixating on this blue thing in the middle of a bright home when someone is sick that she cares about, there might be a reason. And then you come back and you're just okay, does that teach me? Well, it can teach me that circling back around to Homestuck, these characters are doing terrible things, but what is that saying about the character if they're supposed to be a hero?
Ooh, and I'd love to dive more into that. So if you'd like, you get into Dirk and by extension, Bro Strider, the separation of the author you had mentioned earlier, you know, like how these things are interpreted in writing and stuff for you.
Well, death of the author for Homestuck is really hard, and people make that joke all the time, and it's just like, oh, death of the author, Homestuck's mine now. And, like, it's a funny joke, and I get it, but but it's hard because that's not what death of the author means. And it's also hard because Homestuck, having been a call and response from author to audience, you cannot fully death of the author without losing massive parts about what actually Homestuck actually is trying to say. Because going back to, like, and I'll be clear, when I was in Homestuck, I came essentially right before the big Homestuck explosion. And I'm not going to say I was here first. I'm not like a hipster over it. This was just the reality of it. Like, I was there right before the big explosion. I did not come in soon enough, and I was not active in the MSPA forums. So I'm not even, like, the most OG Homestuck fan, and I'm not going to pretend that I was even the most active Homestuck fan at the time, because I was busy in other fandoms. And I missed a whole lot because of that. Like, a lot of the earlier stuff, the first acts, absolutely some of my favorite acts. There is a lot of Homestuck that you cannot... I mean, reading Homestuck now is a lot different from reading it when it was an active thing. Especially because in the context of how a lot of this Homestuck was based off of input from the forums, and then also how Hussey was reacting to their fandom on Tumblr and online in general. Like, it was always a call and response from Hussey to the audience and the audience to Hussey. Because we're slowly now losing that history and the context online, reading it especially without all that context, can be a little weird. You automatically have a sort of death of the author if you're coming into Homestuck this late, because you're not part of the conversation anymore, and the context surrounding it doesn't exist in the same way that it used to. Like, I was never a part of the MSPA forums, but I did visit it at times because there was a lot of stuff that just called back to it, so I could go onto the forum and find the thread and look at the jokes. I'm looking back through my blog, and I have been, to try and, like, pull up some fun stuff to show you, because I know that you said that you came in a lot into Homestuck later than me, so I don't know how much of this stuff you would have even been around to see in the first place. But even going back through, like, my archive, that's not a complete picture of what's happening anymore. Hussey used to have a Tumblr blog.
Yes.
It's gone. It's deleted. I think the Dave Strider one is still around somewhere. That was supposed to be actually Dave Strider's blog.
Is that the one where he says the N-word?
I don't remember. You're asking me to remember something from a blog I don't even remember the name of. But I guess what I'm trying to say, without the context being there, you are missing a part of the story. It was a call and response. The very earliest iterations was Hussey going, okay, in the forum going, what's the character's name? And what is happening next? And, like, they did have a plan for Homestuck. And there was interviews, I think his Curious Cat is still up, actually. They said that at some point that, when asked, that they didn't have all of the story and plot written down, but they kind of knew where it was going in the first place anyway, and that the worst thing that could have happened is if he had to take a long break from the story, because then the only thing that's keeping them on the track of the plot was rapidly putting the story out, essentially.
Yes.
And because of all of this context of, like, how the story was made, and, like, even when they weren't, like, actively taking input from the forums for the panels and where it was going, like, they were looking at meta, they were looking at what the fandom was saying and what the fandom was doing, and, like, that story was still influenced by that. The biggest like examples being the Dancestors and the Trickster mode stuff, both very direct call and response to what was happening in fandom at the time. But reading Homestuck now, because you don't have the context and you can't physically go back and easily find everything in Tumblr, and you can't go back to the forums anymore, like, you are reading Homestuck now has a certain automatic death of the author, because the context of what the author was doing and what the author was trying to say, and all of that context is gone, because it was the fandom and the history of fandom isn't that easy. Of the fandom isn't that easy to find, and everything that you is going to be about is going to be from like me, people like me at the time.
Very real.
And then it goes into also how characters are obviously treated in Homestuck. Like on the most generous side, Calliope and Caliborn are both what Hussey thought of fandom. The good and the bad. The audience for Homestuck changed rapidly and grew exponentially really quickly. I'm even a little bit young for, I think, the target audience of Homestuck. The target audience of Homestuck is people Hussey's age. People who are a little bit older than me, who have a clear memory of a lot of the video games he's referencing, a lot of
the movies. I mean, come on.
And these are things that I watched as a kid, but I was younger than him, so these things don't have the same impact as I did on me as they did to him. There's a lot of things that were also very much callbacks to the internet and culture as it was happening exactly then, as I was growing up, even.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Dave Strider's haircut is just a Justin Bieber haircut is not an accident. Like, this came out in 2009. It's not an accident.
Dave Strider being like an Obama, like, that's my man. Like, he never dropped that.
I am kind of not that much older than the kids are supposed to be, so I was like kind of in that like sweet spot of growing up with these kids in a really strange way. Because in 2009, I also was 13, and a lot of the things that they said, that especially a lot of people consider really problematic, it was just how high school was at the time. And that's not a good thing, but at the same time, having something be accurate to the time period, even at the expense of it being politically incorrect, sometimes has more of a plot impact on what's supposed to be happening in the world than being perfectly PG would be. You see these conversations all about the time in a bigger context of older works like Huckleberry Finn. Should these slurs be in this book? There's not a right answer. I have my opinion on it, which is to remove these slurs from the book would fundamentally change the meaning in what the book is trying to say. And like in the context of Huckleberry Finn, that is a child who looks at the systematic racism in the deep south where he lives and looks at the only father figure in his life and says, well, if a black man being my father figure and being my equal is a sin, then I'm willing to go to hell. And the words that are used are cruel and crude and not pleasant and not appropriate. But would that book have meant the same thing if those words weren't in it? Because that was the reality of the time, and sugarcoating reality isn't, and how things actually were wouldn't make the book, would only take from the impact of the reality of the situation and the threat that, or like the gravity of his moral choice in that meaning. Like, the world wasn't a nice place back then, and if we pretended it was a nicer place than it actually was, what does that sacrifice and that moral choice mean for the main character? Then you're taking away the whole impact, and it comes back to, well, these words that were used in these books are hurtful, and I'm like, and they shouldn't be said, and they shouldn't be out there to be seen. But at the same time, it's like, I agree, but then like, what are you saying about the meaning of this book? Are you saying that, and like, Homestuck doesn't have the same impact. And ultimately, I also think that the majority of the faults of Homestuck aren't as inherently controversial, but the way that words were used are kind of accurate to the time period and the age group that these kids would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people, like a lot of younger people than me, act like gay is and being called gay is such a fine and safe, okay, to be referred to. But I spent most of middle school and high school trying not to be called gay. Because that was the thing that people called you in hall.
Yeah.
Like, the it slur. And, like, the R word, like, still not an acceptable word, because that one's not even necessarily, I don't think, reclaimable. But at the same time, it's like, would taking that word out do anything? Because it's not, when Karkat's using those type of words, he's not being necessarily, like, shown in a good light then, even at that point. It's not like he's being, like, it's being lauded as a good thing. He's supposed to be a temperamental jackass at that point. we don't know him as anything else.
Mhm.
And it's only later that we get to see that he is a point where he's, like, growing past that. And, like I said, Homestuck isn't as big at, like, a literary work, and that, I think, and isn't saying something so meaningful that when people strip out those words, that I think they're doing, like, some great disservice to it. Like, I think the fact that I think it's the unofficial Homestuck collection offers that, because it's not like Huckleberry Finn. If you strip it out, it's gonna change some things, I think, contextually, but it's not the worst thing. But I also think that, like, looking at Homestuck and at only as the side effects of its time and how we view that as progressive versus non-progressive now is doing us disservice to actually what Homestuck was at the time.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It absolutely does. I wanted to let you finish. I wanted to say that, what do you feel, or wanted to ask, I guess, what do you feel about the people who say that writing these things, the people who write these things are using it or doing it in, like, a fetishistic way?
I'm assuming that you're meaning, like, on a broader scale of all the weird things that is touched on Homestuck, because Homestuck itself touches on a lot of really weird topics. And the answer is everything is a fetish. Like, literally, there's not... People act like it's such a weird thing. There is not a whole thing in the world that someone isn't going to fetishize.
That's crazy.
Like, and like, I know that that's not... I can get more exact into it, and I can talk more about, like, the stuff that I know you're kind of angling at.
No, only
like,
what you're comfortable.
I mean, I'm fine talking about it. Like, there is going to be a point in time where a lot of the people who don't realize it will learn, hopefully. So like I said, there's not anything in the world that won't be fetishized. And someone will find something that you find distasteful. I know someone, I'm not super close to them. I haven't talked to them in probably a couple years. Their fetish was sneezing.
Really?
In the way they described it, I wish that could be me, because that sounds fun. It's unfortunate it does not work like that. For them, it was the build-up, the anticipation, and then the warmth that's being taken care of after. And like I said, when they described it, I was like, I wish I could enjoy that, because I can see why you like it. But also, on a base level, the sneezing to me, gross. I cannot. And I feel like that's a really... And I feel like that's a really natural reaction, and we've talked about this on other things, but, like, humans, we have gross out reactions and disgust reactions to things for a reason. Sometimes it's because in real life they're reprehensible things. Sometimes in real life it's because they're dangerous things. A lot of the time, cleanliness is a huge thing that we have a natural disgust against, but people have really... Mm-hmm. In the context of Homestuck, I know that a lot, what you're kind of angling at is the pretty blatant, incest that's in the canon comic.
There is a lot of it. It is a very big portion of it, and it's hinted at a lot. It's outright said a few times. I don't know if this was actually in the comic, and I don't even know if I can check right now because Homestuck.com's always down. But doesn't Nepeta have a conversation at one point where she's like, or maybe if it wasn't Nepeta, it was the fucking, is it Felix the cat when he gets sprited? I don't know, but they're basically like, if you're a kitty and you grew up around kitties and you need to reproduce, I don't know, it was like some shit like that. But ironically, it is the most hot button issue. I was in a VR chat. Sorry. I don't want to cut you off, but, like, I was in a VR chat, like, room once, and they have, like, TVs in there, and you could set it up with, like, a link to anything on the internet, and people would go, they put in movies, they put in things like that, but once in a while, you'll get, like, a bad actor, who will get access to the video stream thing.
What, Two Girls, One Cup on?
We'll say that's the... we'll give you... That's what they do, though! And that's a more benign example, considering the other ones that I don't know, it's a thing. But, yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt your thought there. I was just like, yeah!
What it comes down to is, like, people are going to fetishize everything, and people need to be aware of what they're consuming and what they are actually interacting with. And as long as it's not breaking any laws, you can't complain about it. The biggest thing is people who are against this sort of incest stuff are saying, well, like, it should be illegal. Depictions of it should be illegal because fiction reflects reality.
It's nuanced. It's a complicated.
In 2009, I started writing fanfiction. But I started reading fanfiction on fanfiction.net and Quizilla probably earlier than that, because I was doing that in middle school. We are living in the Renaissance, archival and tagging, and a lot of people who are younger don't realize that. Back in, one of the reasons why people are going to AO3 over fanfiction.net and fanfiction.net got made the way it was in the first place is because fanfiction.net didn't require tagging, and there's no real way to tag on fanfiction.net. So I have a lot of very early memories of reading through things to have surprise, I don't know, pick a kink. Pick one that you don't like. It probably just pops up randomly. And a lot of people are like, okay, well, sure, we're living in the Renaissance, but it still shouldn't exist. A fiction affects the reality. You cannot give someone the power to decide what is and isn't inherently abusive or bad. My husband was making a joke about this earlier. What is porn? The law is in the definition, because you can't really define porn. Porn is a huge thing. Like, it covers so many different things, and that starts going into, well, what is porn? And most people, the law mostly is, I know it when I see it. And that might be reasonable to some people, because they're like, well, yeah, I can tell what's abuse. Like, incest is, none of this should exist, right? Because it's showing someone who, if I'm going to be extremely generous, I can say, okay, I agree. Bad, so maybe it shouldn't be depicted. Maybe I should keep all of my funny little fiction to myself, and because it's inappropriate. The thing is, no one can guarantee that they're going to have, the person who has the final judgment call is going to have the same morals and understanding of and boundaries and ethics as they do. And what you start doing is when you start giving people the power to make something unspeakable, when you give them the power to like censor these sorts of things, it's never going to be what you want it to be. And going into like the real world implications of this, we're seeing it right now. We're seeing the defunding of our library systems as an act of censorship. Mm-hmm. And it's because a lot of these libraries have been putting a lot of effort into raising voices of queer authors and trans authors of color.
Yes.
There are things I also don't like to read online. If I wanted to be talking like those anti-kids, I'd say there are problematic authors who write about things that trigger me. And I'm saying that jokingly, but I understand that making fun of the word trigger isn't necessarily kosher. There are people who write about things that trigger me, genuinely. And there's things that I'd rather not see, and I think it's distasteful that people write about. And I know that my definition of that is much different, because I write things and people think that I'm probably a problematic person. The people who can make these rules aren't going to differentiate between what I write, what the person I don't like writes, and all the pure, non-problematic, gay, queer fan fiction, because it's all bad to them. And that's why there is no distinction, because when you start putting distinction on stuff like that, on what you can write about fictionally, this is where it really comes down to, like, you give an inch and take a mile. These people aren't going to stop at the stuff that you think is like, not you, but like fictional you, the person out there who believes this sort of stuff. They're not going to stop at what is problematic. They're going to go and they're going to squash down whatever they want to write. They don't want people to talk about their sexual abuse in real life. They don't want to talk about people's actual experiences with racism, or experiences with misogyny, or experiences with sexual assault and incest, because it's all going to be just as bad and just as dirty as actual crime stuff. And it's just, all the nice, pure, clean stuff is just going to be just as dirty as all of that. And you can't take away people, like, when you start taking away the ability to people to write about these fictionally, you start making it so people can't write about their real experiences. And you're making it so these people have an in to start taking away voices in writing and depiction in media at all. Because they're not going to stop at what you think is problematic. They're going to take away everything.
All they have to do is they frame it as the worst example.
Yeah, it comes down to, like, well, like, all those drag queens with their drag brunches are indoctrinating and sexually abusing children. It's the next step. It's like, it's always next step. That's where it goes next. It's like, drag brunches are indoctrination, and that's what, and drag brunches are abuse. Trans women are abused. Like, it's literally just the next step. Every step is infringing on our rights, and it feels so stupid to, like, assign this to moral fandoms. But the thing is, people are taking this stuff out into, it's like they're taking it out into their real life. Someone's going to have a fetish over everything. You cannot get worked up over everyone's fetish, as long as if everyone who's involved is consensual of age, or if they're fictional. Like, these fictional people can't be hurt, and it is up to everyone else's, like, responsibility to be able to curate their own online experience.